now we're kind of in the mothership, right?
That's
the
good.
control center.
Yeah, good word for it, John.
Andre, this is, you know, every tech I've talked to, I can't imagine anybody having a more complex job than you. I mean, look at this, man. How does it? Give us a quick rundown.
Sure. Well, I always say in this tour, there's two layers. There's software and there's hardware. And I don't do a lot with the software layer, which is the Orchestron, which we've talked about. But the hardware layer is complicated, yeah. Basically, it starts with his three main guitar signals, which is the guitar synth, his signature Pat Metheny Ibanez.
Sure.
And the third slot is either his Taylor 8-string or his baritone nylon. Those three are selected by a Lely box, Lely 3-to-1.
Yeah.
And then it hits the Game Changer plus pedal, the sustain pedal.
Right.
So all of those could sustain.
Yeah.
That sends to our Leslie, so you can get that nice Leslie thing, little guitar thing. And the signal then goes to the Kemper. And in the Kemper, we pick a patch based on which one of those 4 or 5 guitars we're using. So that's like the basic skeleton of the whole thing. And then from there, how he's listening to those signals. One thing about Pat, and you know, I know there's some nerds who've followed his systems for years. He always has a surround thing. If you go back to his very earliest systems, there's always amps and speakers around him.
Right.
And so that's been fascinating to learn that from him and to keep moving forward with that. So when he plays any of the above, he's hearing it in these Yamaha powered, powered speakers there. He's got it there. He's got it in the 4x10.
Okay.
And some of it he gets in these Bose L1s. So he's got a real surround sound.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, some of his internal, all the guitars have internal mics. You've noticed all the guitars I'm plugging 2 things in.
Right.
There's a 1/4 inch with your regular pickup, and every guitar outside of the Roland has a mic inside.
Yeah.
So that mic is often in the L1s. In this tour, we haven't really experimented that much with that, but with the trio and other groups, he always has the internal guitar there. Yeah. The point is, when you play, you're hearing it all around.
Yeah.
And it's really, I suggest try that out. Guitarist.
You know, I wonder. I remember seeing him back, like in the Jocko things. It seems like those guys are always playing so close, kind of in the round like that. Like, maybe that's what he's. That's where it started. Expanded to that.
That's a great point. That kind of jazz thing of just turn down, get close.
Yeah, get close, listen. Yeah.
He always stands near the drummer, and so he always is really keyed into the rhythmic thing.
Right. Right. Well, he's definitely near the drums. On
Exactly. Other stuff in hardware. So all the electric guitars that I just said that can go into the Kemper, he can loop them. He's got a Electro-Harmonix 95,000 looper.
So what's all on the ground? First the sustain.
So sustain. Okay. So for the electric signal, quote unquote, he can loop anything he wants with the EHX 95,000. Right. And it's a great looper. It's a 6-track looper. We're only using 2 tracks.
And those have been around for a while, right?
Yeah, those have been, I'm not sure, half a dozen years or something. Yeah.
Why change?
Yeah, they're very cool. He also sidechain controls it with some other MIDI commands from that Solman. That's from Source Audio.
Right.
And we have a couple of those around. And that's just so that there's some extra commands he can throw in there. Reverse and stuff like that.
Right.
And then the Infinity Looper, which is a great looper. That's Pigtronics. That's amazing. The sound fidelity in that is really incredible. 48K.
Wow.
And we're using that on one of those beautiful baritone guitars.
Yeah.
So he does just a tiny bit of looping on that, and it sounds fantastic. So that's most of the pedals. This guy here
Roland?
That's a classic. He's had that for 40 years, and he's one of the first people to use the Roland guitar synth. And it's one of those things that's on just about every Pat Metheny album. I mean, I haven't really gone one by one. I know most of his records, but pretty sure it's on every record.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe there's 2 or 3 that are with an orchestra or something.
Right.
But
I saw him almost 40 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And he had that guitar.
Yeah. It's a signature. Yeah.
Yeah. That and the 175.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, but as far as like traditional guitar effects, there's not really...
Not that much. And you know, Pat's sound, again, the historian people watching this know, he's always had a pretty simple sound.
Yeah. And that's why the Roland is such a departure.
Yeah, in a way, yeah. I mean, and in another way, it's part of his normal paintbrush set, right? So, but yeah, departure from the quote-unquote, you know, straight-ahead jazz player or whatever, which, you know, he never has been, as you know.
Yeah.
I think, though, being with him almost 2 years now and listening closely now, after listening as a fan for 40 years, the sound of the guitar itself is what, you know, any really great player, obviously, but for Pat especially, the sound of that, a jazz guitar, the resonance of, it's a hollow guitar. It's got, so he really goes to that natural sound, hence the microphone inside.
Right.
You know, that's a big part of getting that. And then getting back to your question, there's not many effects he would ever put on.
Yeah.
He just raises the volume, a little reverb.
How often does he engage the Leslie?
So the Leslie on this tour is just like a fun effect, a handful of times per night. He does a really quote-unquote experimental looping moment, and the nickname for it on the set list is Zero Tolerance for Silence, which that's his record of very extreme kind of two-dimensional music, as he called it. A lot of people thought, what is this? Some people took it back to the record store. So I loved it. It was this noise side of Pat that you hear snippets of otherwise. So he does a piece in this show that's just extreme swirling loops of the oddly tuned 8-string Taylor. On that, he hits the sustain, the plus pedal a bunch of times, and you get this beautiful ringing thing with the 8 strings. He also does it on some of his solo 175 pieces. We call it the 175. That's the Pat Metheny jazz guitar. But we call it that.
Ibanez, obviously.
Ibanez, because he loves that history, the Gibson history. So he uses it quite a bit on that. And it really, it's cool. It gets like an organ tone, a little pedal tone once in a while. Yeah.
But for the most part, this whole kind of thing is about loops, the Roland, and then running into the Kemper, and then the pretty elaborate monitoring system.
Yeah. Again, the outer monitors are the electric. That's Kemper's feeding those directly. And the Myers in the middle there are more the acoustic monitoring. He can put anything in there, but typically it's the nylon, the baritones.
What's with this mysterious orb over there?
So the orb gets into the software half of the equation. It's like a yin-yang thing. There's a couple times he's playing to a rhythm track that he's made before. He does both things in this show. He creates tracks live in front of the audience.
That's so scary. Has there been ever... You ever gotten a little sideways?
You're out on a limb. So exactly what that is good for is it's a metronome. So it blinks, red is 1. So red, 2, 4, red, 2, 3, 4, or whatever the time might be, 7, 3, whatever. So we use that with the trio. And with the trio, all 3 people have to kind of glance over and see where the 1 is.
It's like having a conductor.
It's like having a conductor. So that's what that one is. The other one's a record light. So when he hits record, he can be enter on stage and know, all right, I've made contact with Ableton. And so the software half of this show, that's the other MIDI pedals too. Any of the MIDI pedals really are for stopping and starting and recording in Ableton.
Man, it is all so complex. Just that part is so complex. And then when he's playing, it's just
exactly. It's right. It's complex music on top of it. But
I wonder if it's got to be so hard to just let go of that anxiety and tension of the technical thing and just like flow, because when he plays, it just got such a flow to it.
You know, he's great at that. I think, let's remember, he's one of the people that embraced technology early on. Late 70s, he was already, you know, they had an Oberheim 4-voice synth, they had little sequencers and things, and as soon as the synclavier was available, he's one of the early adopters. Lexicon, all the early stuff. So he really always tried technology.
Right. And doing it, I mean, it's funny because back then there was that kind of a blowback from jazzers about that stuff.
Absolutely.
Although Miles, you know, went very weird.
That's true. He always loved wah-wahs and Pete Cozy in the 70s.
Right.
That's a good comparison. Yeah. So I think, yeah, he's very comfortable. I will say, too, that, again, I have very little to do with the software side. My only involvement, I think, was suggesting the looper from Ableton, because I used to use that with Adrian Ballou.
Oh, yeah.
And what we did was take, and our production manager, Zach Rosenberg, who's a great programmer and Ableton guy, he took the old version of the Ableton program, added some stuff in. We had some other Max for Live things, and people help us put some patches in there. But that Ableton program is interesting because he's been using that since the early days. And we kind of took the live set, as it's called, from years ago, and morphed it into this year's version with a bunch of MIDI clips being recorded and different moves inside Ableton. But again, he goes over to the computer and edits stuff, and he's written a lot of these programs from scratch, a lot of these patches in the programs.
Wow.
I mean, he used Digital Performer 1.0. So you raise a great point. He's very comfortable when there's a problem. He's really great with giving us ideas of what it might be, and
I imagine with the complexity of this rig, there are problems.
Well, it's funny. Today was an interesting day, John, because we did some changes that we've been trying to do for several days, and today kind of had some extra time. Ran into a little bit of problem here and there, and plus we had some repairs because we're in Nashville, some great luthiers. So kind of all this stuff collided. Plus we're in this beautiful museum setting, which limited our time. So you kind of saw like some tech juggling.
I loved it.
But,
you are the hardest working man in show business.
Thank you. Some of my heroes, like Thomas Nordegg, him. That's he's the one of the hardest working. Or Frank Robbins, who's with Mo and Whole Notes. But I appreciate that. I try to work hard, and I look up to these incredible techs. I also want to give a shout out, because she's never done one of these interviews, but Carolyn Curzon, who was
I don't know.
Yeah, she's Pat's. He's only had 2 techs in 40 years.
Wow.
So Carolyn was his tech from about '84 till 2002.
Wow.
And it's funny because before I even met her, I'd go to his shows, and she's like this Jedi, quietly moving around, grabbing guitars, never said a word, kind of expressionless, and I was just in awe of how hard this woman worked, and to become a close friend, and she's a mentor, and she's taught me so much. So, but she never did stuff like this. And she's no social media, all that.
Nobody does.
But talk about hardest working. She did this stuff with no cell phone, no GPS. You couldn't look up manuals online. So I always honor her, and I try to really raise the bar for her, and because she is one of the backbones of decades of all those shows we went to. So I look up to her, and I look up to, again, all these other techs. But thank you. I do work hard, and I haven't seen you guys since, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago with Adrian. We did.
Right.
And that's a crazy rig too.
I like the crazy rigs.